All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Demystifying 10DLC registration webinar. My name is Hannah Clendenin and I manage our virtual events here at Bandwidth, and I'll be your moderator today. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are muted to prevent any background noise, so all questions will need to be entered into the Q&A box on your control panel. Don't hesitate to ask anything that you may want to know, but we will reserve questions for our time of Q&A at the end of the session. You'll also receive a recording link of today's webinar via email in the next few business days, so be on the lookout for that. And as you are probably aware, we will be doing a giveaway of a Yeti cooler at the end of the presentation before the Q&A, and we'll announce the winner then. And the Bandwidth team will reach out to the winner with details regarding the prize. We have two speakers with us on the webinar today. We're excited to have Stefan Heller and Emily Champion. Stefan Heller is the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at the Campaign Registry. He has over 30 years of experience in the mobile ecosystem globally, spanning across the UK, Europe, Southeast Asia, and most recently the US. You could say he's kind of been there, done that, and seen it all. From multi-country compliance regulations and wholesale messaging deals, the current rollout of 10DLC in the US and resulting coordination with US carriers using the Campaign Registry, he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the messaging ecosystem table. We also have with us Emily Champion, who's a product manager at Bandwidth, and she's been with Bandwidth for about 3.5 years, but directly involved in 10DLC for about 1.5 years. And during her time at Bandwidth, she's broadened her scope and maintained a great fondness and knowledge of 10DLC. Emily came to Bandwidth because of her love of working directly with customers to solve their problems and the emphasis Bandwidth places on customer service. She regularly attends the 10DLC council meetings and industry-focused meetings specifically for those leaders in the space to give feedback on and learn about upcoming developments. Obviously, our presenters have an incredible amount of experience, so if there's anything I missed, please feel free to add that, but I will pass it off to Emily to get us started today. Thanks, everyone.
Sure, sounds good. So the agenda that we're going to go through overall is really focused on just sort of how we got to where we are, what the initial adoption has been, as well as what to know when registering brands and campaigns. So you can see here that since the first text messages were sent over 20 years ago, there have been a lot of changes in the messaging industry. Most of the changes have been in the past 1.5 years or two, as the carriers look to prevent the industry from spam. So there are a few key events I do want to point out on this slide. The 2018 FCC ruling, which allows the carriers to self-regulate the overall messaging industry. Verizon initially started their 10DLC program in February of 2020, and then AT&T began their pilot shortly after that, with a formalized process coming out in August of 2020. In addition, T-Mobile released their updated code of conduct, as well as their process in the fall of 2020. So there, as you can see, a lot has changed in the past, probably like 4 years, I would say. But one of the key developments is actually the creation of the Campaign Registry. So I'll let Stefan tell us a little bit more about what TCR is.
Thank you, Emily. So the Campaign Registry, the TCR, most people tend to call it these days because we like to give everything at least 3 letters. And the Campaign Registry, it's the central hub for the registration of A2P 10DLC messaging campaigns. So you're registering the brands and you're registering the campaigns that they're going to be issuing. And we put a score, it's a vetting score that's assigned to each brand, and that's also then means that the information that we get is passed along to the carriers to ensure that they know what's happening across their network. And really, if you simplify it, the registry is there to establish who it is and what are they doing. And with that transparency given to the carriers can then support that messaging, and they can support it as a carrier-supported product. So that means that if something's going wrong or there needs to be an escalation, the carriers are there to help solve and fix those problems. And the registry just ensures that the information is there. So it's critical that the information that's put into the registry is accurate and does reflect what you will be doing in market, because it is checked. Back to you, Emily, I think.
Yeah, I think that's definitely helpful. So one of the key things that we've been asked several times is just what was the big change on March 1st? So on March 1st, really, it was T-Mobile and AT&T began imposing additional surcharges on messages that were essentially not registered. So sometimes that means that unregistered traffic can have additional deliverability issues. It also means it costs more. The carriers are really trying to drive adoption towards 10DLC, and they really want traffic to be registered so they know who is sending the messages and why they are sending them. So you can see there, we kind of outline it as the who is always going to be the brand that Stefan mentioned, and then the why is really the campaign. So that's sort of how I always like to delineate it, is you have to tell them who is sending and then why you're sending it. So with that, do you mind telling us a little bit more about how exactly 10DLC works within TCR?
Sure, thanks, Emily. So 10DLC A2P registration, it is a very simple process at a very high level. And the first part of the registration is really where the CSP will register the brands and campaigns within TCR, and they get a unique campaign ID for that registration process. And the operation is done either via APIs or actually in the CSP portal via a UI. And you get a number of different pieces of information that are entered for the brand. The brand then is verified. After the brand is verified, then you can then start to register your actual physical campaigns. So you look at the steps here. One is to actually register. Second is publish. So once you've done the simple and very quick process of actually registering the brand and then registering the campaigns, and this is all predicated primarily on ensuring that you are accurate in the information you're giving, because it is not maybe atypical for someone to think, oh, I work at Joe's Pizza Shop, and Joe's Pizza Shop is in this local high street and on this local strip mall, and that's the address for Joe's Pizza Shop. So I'm going to put Joe's Pizza Shop as the name of the brand, and this mall is the address in XYZ city. The reality is that when Joe's Pizza Shop was actually registered, it was registered as Joe's Fun Food Service, DBA Joe's Pizza Shop, and it was registered in Delaware, not in the location that the actual physical place is. So you have to look at what the IRS actually states it has been registered for that business. And people forget that sometimes, and so there can be delays when you're not putting in the correct information. I know the Bandwidth crew and the account manager there at Bandwidth do a fantastic job of helping people through these steps and making sure that they understand the information they have to provide to help a seamless sort of registration. So once you've got all of that, you get this campaign ID issued. And with the campaign ID, this is uploaded into the OSR with net number. And the DCA then goes to the publishing part, and they upload the numbers with associated campaign ID to the NNID in the OSR. Lots of lovely abbreviations, and look, trust net number to be different. 4 letters, not 3. And no, right? It's just they have to be different. So we'll just call them OSR. It's easier. It's 3 letters. Let's keep to what we know. So you have the CSP. They get their campaign ID. They then integrate with their DCA, and that DCA issues numbers that go you get your campaign ID. You associate it with your numbers. You associate it with your NNID, all in the OSR. And then when it goes live, the brand can now send those messages and to the end users via a high quality sanctioned process, because at the end of the day, the carriers can look at the campaign ID, they can see what actually it is, they can see then what is actually being sent. If there's a discrepancy, they'll go, why is there discrepancy? Did somebody not register this correctly? They could flag it, they could look at it, they can decide if there's something they need to come back to Bandwidth and say, we need to talk about this one because it looks like it's not doing what you said it would be doing. And that happens. Sometimes when you're working with bandwidth networks with a lot of resellers, and when you're working with those reseller customers, it could be that there's been not quite the accurate information that you yourselves might need, and somebody's changed something without telling you, and that does happen. So we want to make sure that people realize that if they change things, they need to inform you. They need to tell you what's going on, because the transparency of information is critical for making the registration of 10DLC work, and for the brands that you look after at Bandwidth to really have a fantastic experience with 10DLC. Because if they start chopping and changing midstream and no one knows what's going on, and the first thing they think is like, well, why are they doing that? Is this something dodgy? Is this some sort of bad actor that's trying to get one over in the whole ecosystem? And that's where everybody goes to first. And they need to realize that accuracy of information is critical to ensure that carriers and the whole ecosystem, not just carriers, but everybody, Bandwidth included, trust the people that are giving them the information and putting it into the registry.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. One thing I want to add, at least for the customers that are going either through Bandwidth directly or through TCR to actually create their campaign ID, once they have that campaign ID, they always bring it back to Bandwidth and they associate it with phone numbers there. And then we handle all of that addition of ensuring it's on the right net number ID, that all of those steps are being taken on your behalf. So that way, all you really have to do is tell us this campaign ID needs to go on this phone number. We try to make it as simple as we can when it comes to that aspect of it. So I think the next slide is all about sort of showing how since March of 2022, we have seen our registered traffic continue to grow as more and more customers really look to adopt 10DLC, and as more and more brands realize that this is beneficial to them in the long run. TCR did share with us that there have been over 1 million brands and campaigns registered overall, which is a very impressive number. So a lot has been happening in the past 2 years since TCR was really founded. We've definitely seen some overall bumps along the road. I know that there have been a couple customers that have come to us and said, my use case really isn't represented here. How should I register if my use case isn't represented? So in the past, we have definitely worked directly with TCR and with the carriers to kind of help develop, bring that solution and bring that need to the carriers and work with them to come up with a new solution for those particular customers. I know a lot of that is really tied back to the UseCast use case that really you can see sort of has come out recently. That was one of the key ones that people point out as a missing link there. So we've definitely been helping to guide our customers through the entire process, as well as trying to advocate within the industry to ensure that overall everybody is being heard, and that overall if there is a gap in the process, that maybe there are so many use cases within 10DLC that it's very possible gaps happen, that use cases aren't necessarily accounted for. We want to try to work together to ensure that 10DLC can really fit what everybody needs.
Exactly. I totally agree, Emily. I mean, the interaction that we have with Bandwidth is really critical to the development of new use cases, because we can't think of everything. And like any product that gets launched, you hope you've done as good a job as you can do to cover everything off. And as soon as you release it, you realize you've missed like 5 things. And it's like, okay, now we've got to now we're running at a certain speed, and we've got to also involve and put in these new use cases, get them up to speed, make sure that process is not clunky and not going to prohibit people from having a good experience as fast as possible. And that customer experience with 10DLC at the end of the day is really important, because it is more friction than what people were used to, but it's friction for a reason. It's friction because the carriers and the general ecosystem want to make sure that they know what's running across the network, so that consumers know what they're going to be receiving, and that we're not just enhancing or allowing bad actors into a space to exploit it and make it worse for everybody else.
Yeah, that's really well said.
So one of the things we looked at from TCR's perspective is we track a a number of different parameters. So we looked at, what were the top 10 campaign use cases. These are campaign use cases from the selection of use cases that you can choose when you're actually registering a campaign within TCR. So low volume is a weird campaign use case. Low volume is actually where you can select 5 sub-use cases, up to 5 sub-use cases for this low volume case. It means that you accepted that your use case is going to only hit the low volume parameters for, say, T-Mobile and AT&T. And that's fine. You don't need more than that. So you only need the low volume use case. And within the low volume use case, you can have this mixed aspect as well, which means you can add 5 sub use cases in there, which means for small businesses, it's an ideal first place to go to. So for SMBs that are going in there, they're looking like they're going to it, they want to grow their business. The low volume is very obvious, a very obvious choice, and we can see that it's one of the primary choices. It's also, in terms of cost, one of the cheaper per monthly campaign fees for TCR campaign fees that are given out. And as you can see, it's somewhat obvious when you look at the top 10: marketing, customer care, account notifications, politicals right there, just above sort of the middle, and that's very apropos because of, obviously, we're in a midterm. And so there are going to be a lot more political use cases running right now. Charity as well, which could also include some political elements. Higher education, 2FA. Interestingly, 2FA is quite low. I thought it would have been higher, but right now it is running lower in terms of use cases. But also what we don't know at this point is, and what we haven't done the deep dive in the low volume, there is also, you could choose 2FA, and you could choose marketing, and you could choose, customer care in your low volume. So there could well be more 2FA in the low volume. So this is just people that have specifically chosen just 2FA campaigns. And at the very end, you've got the platform free trial, which is obviously for platforms that have special unique offers that they're giving to their customers to try their platform and to be wowed by their platform, as I'm sure people that come to Bandwidth never leave because they're so impressed. I mean, that's the way it would go, right? The next slide, the campaign verticals. Again, I don't think people would see this as exceptionally unique. Probably what would be expected. Retail right up there, obviously, followed by healthcare, followed by professionals. It's a weird one. It's a mix of a vertical. Real estate, technology, NGOs, it's the government really, government entities. Then you've got financial, education, insurance, and bringing up the rear, entertainment. Because we do work with, and the people like Bandwidth work with some very large entertainment organisations. Okay, it's now back to Emily.
It is. So obviously, thank you for the overview of all of the various verticals and use cases. One thing I do want to call out is that each carrier does have a slightly different view of how they look at this data. So Verizon looks deeply into the numbers and what is being sent on those numbers, so the content of the messages. AT&T is really looking more at the campaign as a whole, so the why is a message being sent, and then T-Mobile is looking really more at the who is sending messages. And you can see some of that in the various things that each carrier is focused on, like AT&T in particular has all of their message per second rate limiting set at a campaign level, whereas T-Mobile has everything set up at a brand level. So each brand, no matter how many campaigns are underneath it, can really only send so many messages a day. That's kind of the overall viewpoint of each of the carriers. I know it's very complex in terms of each carrier is looking at something very different. So Bandwidth really tries to simplify that down. We really want to make sure that all you really need to be concerned with is giving us the proper information, and then we try to handle the carriers on the other end. We try to ensure that everything that they need from us, we're able to actually provide them. We do have pretty regular meetings with them and give them pretty good feedback back and forth. They give us feedback, we make improvements, we give them some feedback on what we're saying maybe doesn't work, and get advice from them. So we do try to stay pretty close to that, and we do definitely try to ensure that this process seems as seamless as we can make it, because it is a very big change. It's a change that the industry is having to sort of absorb as a whole, but it is for an overall good reason. The carriers really do want to help protect the industry, and they want the industry to continue growing in the future, and they want to make sure that happens in a good, in a, I guess, the best way possible that doesn't include bad actors and doesn't include their consumers getting angry about the multitude of spam messages that they do receive. I think the best thing is nobody really wants to have a phone number that they only give out, so that way they get spam messages to that one phone number, like you sometimes do with email addresses. So that's kind of the role the carriers are looking to avoid happening. So that's really, I think, all that. Oh no, we do have one more slide. I forgot. I'm sorry. So one thing I do want to call out is you can see just an overall account hierarchy here. So you can see at the top would be the bandwidth customer, and then from there they would have their customers. So you can see there's multiple different campaigns, multiple ways that can be tied up together. You can see for customer A, maybe they're a local pizza shop. I think it was Joe's Pizza Shop. So you can have Joe's Pizza Shop there, and maybe they use all of their phone numbers for both marketing and delivery. So that would be a perfect use case for low volume mixed use case, because they're a local pizza shop. They use their phone number for multiple things, so they don't fit into any one category. Highly recommend the mixed use case there. For brand B, maybe it's a service delivery manager, and they also on multiple things with their single phone numbers, so they also have a low volume use case. For customer C, maybe they're a larger company and they have a group of phone numbers that they only use for marketing purposes, just so that they can track things a little bit more effectively. They can really get much better analytics. So they have a separate campaign that's just for marketing, and then they have that campaign C2 that you can see there. That's their actual customer communication, where they have somebody that's out delivering something. That delivery manager needs to reach out to people and actually ensure that they are home, or if they need anything else, things like that. So overall, you can kind of tell that each campaign can only have, or I should say, each telephone number can only be on one campaign. So you can have multiple use cases flowing over a single telephone number. So that's where overall you can see how it's very customizable and very interchangeable. So customers can really ensure that things happen the way that they want it to happen overall.
Awesome. Stefan, did you have anything to add to that one before we move on to Q&A?
No, I think the only thing I would really add is that the part of the goal of 10DLC is to take numbers out of the ecosystem. It's kind of a weird thing, right? It's when long codes at their height, there was a lot of numbers used to get around certain systems, spam systems that were in place. And the whole goal now is to actually ensure that people realize that they can send messages utilizing a single number. If you've got a 2FA campaign, unless you really have some unique reason to have more than a single number, you should be able to operate that 2FA on a single number. You don't need multiple numbers. Now, I know that's a weird thing for me to say on a bandwidth webinar, because bandwidth does have one part of their service is to sell numbers, is to help people ensure that they have the right services with the right number of numbers. But I just wanted to point out that 10DLC was really sort of there as a sanctioned product versus long code to take numbers out of the ecosystem, so that people realize they didn't have to manage a huge number of these numbers unless needed to, dependent on the use cases. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to make. I mean, overall, there definitely are certain use cases that do require more phone numbers, but the definite goal is to reduce the phone numbers to the minimum amount possible. I'd say it's excellent use cases I've seen for multiple phone numbers are there's a national hotel chain that is running different campaigns for, or I should say, each of their locations is all running a single marketing campaign. So they might have multiple phone numbers underneath that one campaign because it's a very large chain. Some of that can be an excellent use case for having multiple phone numbers on a campaign. But overall, I'd say we have been seeing customers reduce their overall usage of phone numbers as they realize that they can achieve more with the minimum amount of phone numbers.
Cool.
That's great. Well, thank you, Stefan and Emily. And as promised, before we begin our Q&A section, I'd like to announce our winner. Congratulations to Jared from One Choice Tech, who's our prize winner today. Our team will be reaching out to you individually with the prize. And now we'll move on to questions. And I think we've already gotten several in, but feel free to add those into the Q&A box, and we will get to as many as we can. I wanted to start out, I think, Stefan, you touched on some of this, but we got a few questions related to, do I need a different registration for each brand and each use case?
So for each brand, yes, there is a registration for each brand because we need to verify that brand does actually exist in the world somewhere. So there is a verification process for the brand, and that brand is either verified or unverified. If unverified, it means that some of the data being entered into the registration process is faulty in some way. So we do need to register the unique brands, and then for each unique brand, they can have multiple use cases. It's not a one-to-one relationship, it's a one-to-many relationship from brand to campaign.
Yeah, but then each of those campaigns can only have one brand. I have been asked that before, so I want to call that one out. Each campaign can only have a single brand. It's that whole tree that we had.
Correct. Well, yeah, I suppose it depends in part on the actual makeup of the campaign, what the campaign is doing. Like, what is your messaging campaign to do? If it is to reflect a very specific messaging campaign for a single brand, that's true. But I suppose you could have a campaign that goes across a portfolio because you're messaging a particular user base that all like certain forms of chocolate, which could be multiple brands of chocolate, but they all like chocolate. So yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm getting into the weeds. Don't get into the weeds. Not a good place to be.
No problem. Thanks. I think we had a couple questions around that, so that's helpful. Another kind of, I think it's a bit more specific to that, is the trust score assigned to the brand and or the campaign?
So a couple of things. Trust score, I saw that up there earlier, and it's kind of not called a trust score. Trust score was actually a term that was originated by a different DCA, not bandwidth. And for some reason, it got used by a lot of people, and it's wrong. We have never called it a trust score. It is a vetting score. And the vetting score, it just relates to what exactly the product does. It is vetting and is looking at information on the brand. And it's the brand that is vetted, not the campaign.
Got it.
Although I would add, sorry, Hannah, I would add that the campaign does need to meet, and I know Emily knows, all the various compliance guidelines to operate messaging in the ecosystem in the US. You have to read those CTI guidelines inside out, backwards, forwards, as well as the unique conditions that each carrier may have on top of those.
So we have seen in the past sometimes where maybe that brand score isn't, the brand vetting score is a little bit on the lower end because some of the information might have been entered in slightly off. And then they don't actually meet the qualifications for certain carriers. So you'll only be able to register a campaign for 2 out of the 3 carriers potentially. So we have seen that happen. Again, that's one of those instances of just ensuring you're entering in the correct information, as well as if you continue running into roadblocks, there is the possibility of going through external vetting, which is an additional process. It involves a little bit of a deeper dive into things. And And a lot of times that does help to significantly raise up a brand score. So that way they maybe can hit all three carriers rather than just the two or one that they were initially approved for.
That's great, very helpful. We also had a question in explaining the vetting process. There are a couple maybe general pointers that you could add to that, or is it basically what you just shared in terms of the vetting?
Do you want to take that, Emily, initially, and I'll join in?
Definitely can. So essentially, a lot of what TCR really does when they are vetting a customer is they are really looking to ensure that the company or the entity, I should say, that is being entered exists. So a lot of that is ensuring that the EIN number, that tax identifier, that it is matched up with the address that was registered with the IRS, that it is matched up with the legal name that was provided. If it is a publicly traded company, what is that stock number? All of these various clues essentially are what they are trying to match up to actually figure out, is this a legitimate brand that is trying to register, or is it somebody who is just kind of trying to spoof their way through being a brand? So that's kind of it at a high level. And then when you go into external vetting, you have a couple of different options. I know our political customers are very familiar with one of the entities that is doing only political vetting called Campaign Verify. So if you are a political company, you do have to go through an extra step in order to register political campaigns. That is one of the external vetting options. And then there are two more. I think it's WMC Global and Aegis. WMC Global and Aegis both offer just standard external vetting where they kind of do a bit of a deeper dive into, I can't speak to either of their processes fully, but they do a deeper dive into the information that was provided and try to actually verify it a little bit further. I do know Aegis also now offers political vetting as well, I believe.
Yes.
So let me know if I missed anything there. It's very possible.
I think you covered it all. The vetting process itself is if you find that when you have your brand verified and then you start looking at what you can do with that verification and the score that's been given on that verification, then you could find that, like you say, Emily, you might not have the throughput that you would maybe need for that messaging campaign. The initial first route is to go and get externally vetted. There is an extra charge for that. It's a separate charge for that external vetting because the main registration is a fixed one-time fee, or is a fixed fee, beg your pardon. If you get it wrong multiple times, you are charged multiple times for getting it wrong. So that's why we like to say, just please make sure you get it right. And the external vetting fee is on top, and it does go through many other points. It looks back on a lot of history on the brand. It may not change your score. It's not guaranteed to go up. I mean, it may not change your score because it could be that there's some things that could be found out within that discovery period. That when you're looking at all of those various points, that it doesn't improve your score because there actually could be worse things in there.
That makes sense. Thank you for covering that. Another question we had was, how does 10DLC registration compare to the toll-free verification process?
So I know I'm probably the most familiar with those right now. A lot of times, one of the key differences I would say is just that a lot of the information is the same, but it's the form in which it is being gathered. So right now, TCR does have everything available via both an API and a dashboard. Bandwidth is the same. We do have everything available via API and dashboard. Toll verification currently is only available via a form that needs to be filled out. We are, at least Bandwidth is currently working on an API. I think we have a toll-free verification webinar later in like a month or so. So we'll probably cover that in a little bit more detail then, but just spoiler alert, we are working on an API to make that a seamless process. One of the differences I've at least noticed is that the actual time to get up and running is a little bit shorter. is shorter, I'd say, overall with 10DLC registration, in the sense of TCR has a pretty robust system in place, and it does create the brand and it does create the campaigns pretty quickly. I think I've tested it multiple times, obviously, and in general, it takes a couple of seconds if you have all of your information entered in correctly. So it can be up and running pretty quickly. And then you take the campaign ID that you're given, you tie it to the phone number. That process might take a little bit longer, but still you're up and running within an hour or two overall total. Toll-free verification, on the other hand, does go through a very manual review process currently. So with that, it can take a couple of days potentially to get your verification status back. There might be a lot of back and forth via tickets to actually figure out what is missing from that verification request, what potentially they need clarification on, things like that. It's a lot of, I'd say, human interaction with toll-free verification. The difference is that once that verification request goes through, that number is verified as a whole. You don't have to take any additional action to sort of tie anything back to the phone number. The phone number itself is just then verified. So that's kind of the difference in a nutshell, is what I would say. Overall, they both require a lot of the same information, but they overall have different time to markets, some different requirements. I know that opt-in, the overall opt-in process is they have to look into it a little bit more deeply with toll-free verification. So that does require a lot of the back and forth, is what I've noticed.
No, that makes sense. Another question we had is, how is it different for verticals like healthcare, where each brand is going to have the same campaign type?
So healthcare, you have to, again, it comes down to brand registration, right? So if if you're looking at, say, different clinics, each one of those clinics is a unique brand. But however, if there are messages being sent out on behalf of a group of clinics, like they're the same group. It's like, I'm just trying to think of the right example, and I can't. But if there's a group of clinics, it's Overlake Hospitals. So Overlake Hospitals in Seattle, for example, the Overlake group own and run a number of different hospitals. So if they, as Overlake, as a corporate entity, are sending out things that are on behalf of that whole group, that is a different messaging campaign versus, say, if Overlake of Bellevue was actually sending out something unique. Overlake Bellevue is its own brand. Overlake Corporate is its own brand. So you have to think of it from the perspective of who is sending the messages, what are they trying to communicate, to then decide and then understand if you need to, whether you're doing it at the corporate level, whether you're doing it at the unique brand level. Ultimately, if somebody is sending a bunch of messages and it's a group of organizations just saying, oh, we're all healthcare, so we're all sending the same message, it's like, fine, but are you sending the same message via a platform that is sending it on your behalf? And are they running those messages as a template? And you cannot change any part of it. The information is being dropped into a templatized message, in which case that organization, there's nothing that anybody can change things. It's all about what is the propensity for someone to change the message, because you don't want that to happen. You want the message to be as clean as possible. You say you're going to send this message, that's what you send. So that's why there's correlation between brand and campaign. I hope that's answered it.
I mean, one of the ways I always like to relate it back is, if I am receiving a message as a consumer, would I be able to identify who that message is coming from accurately? So if it is, like, as you said, Stefan, the Overlake Health Systems, if I get a message from them saying I have an appointment, would I assume that it was coming from Overlake Health Systems Bellevue, which is where I have the appointment, or would I be under the assumption it's coming from their corporate office? So sometimes that's how I always like to relate it, as who, as a consumer, would I assume is sending that message out?
Yeah, much better answer than mine.
Nope. Those are both great. Thank you both. Another question we had was, can I use the same number for multiple use cases? And then kind of a second part of that question, how many phone numbers can be in a campaign?
So sometimes it does depend on the campaign type there. So I will say you can use the same phone number for multiple use cases, but you can only have one campaign on that phone number. So if you are using that phone number for multiple use cases, I highly recommend choosing a mixed campaign, either a low volume mixed campaign or a standard mixed campaign. That just is what more accurately represents that you are doing multiple things with that phone number. I will say each of the various campaign types does have slightly different views on the maximum phone numbers that are on it. I do know that T-Mobile in particular has some additional steps that are needed if you want to have over 49 telephone numbers on a campaign. We do have that process outlined pretty heavily on our website, so I know we can go into a lot of detail there. But that is one of the caveats is for a standard campaign type, T-Mobile does have a limitation. And then as well as for the sole proprietor campaign type, there is a limitation there. I believe it is 5 phone numbers currently. I do know that overall campaign type might be experiencing a couple changes in the future. So that is something we are definitely keeping in close contact with Stefan on in particular.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. Steph, anything you wanted to add? Or
No, Emily said it all. She's
awesome.
So good.
Great. Been very, very close with 10DLC for a while now.
That's great. You mentioned T-Mobile, Emily. One of the questions is, how can I get higher throughput for T-Mobile?
So that is definitely where that external vetting process comes in. Generally, T-Mobile, if you look at their overall registration, kind of how they have their higher throughput doled out. So if you're in the what they consider the upper quadrant, you do get the highest throughput possible. If you're into that middle, you get about mid-range. If you're in the low, obviously. T-Mobile does have this sort of rule in place that if you're a Russell 2000 company, you are pretty much automatically put into that upper category. If you are not a Russell 2000, you are usually in that low category until you go through external vetting. So that's sort of one of the key ways we recommend getting higher throughput to T-Mobile if it's necessary. Is first try external vetting. If you still don't receive a score that you really need in order to get the throughput that you need, they do have a process called a special business review. It is a more manual process. It does require some forms to be filled out directly with Bandwidth, and then Bandwidth takes it to T-Mobile. There are some more significant costs associated with that. So that is something that we usually recommend as kind of if you don't receive the score you need to through external vetting, we do have that as an option. We just recommend you try that after external vetting.
That makes sense. Thanks, Emily. I think we have time for about one more question. Once you have a brand set up, are you able to submit campaigns in bulk for TNDLC, or is it a one-by-one process, like waiting for each review to happen? And I think this was specifically for political clients that have many variants of messaging.
Emily, do you want, from your perspective, how do you see that when you see that coming in your side?
A lot of times what we see is that you do kind of have to wait for the actual, if you are referring to when you say the review to go through, you do have to wait for that external vetting for political to be attached, because you really can't create a political campaign from a brand that hasn't actually been externally vetted for political. So you do have to wait for that to happen before you can start creating political campaigns. That is definitely something I can see as a waiting period. I'd say after that, it would really kind of depend on how everything is set up overall. Of like, there's a single campaign for fundraising, and then there's a single campaign for communication. Those might be a little bit different in terms of the needs of each one. I wouldn't expect that you would submit the exact same information multiple times. I think that's where I might need a little bit more information on that one, just in terms of why they would need to create everything in bulk, unless you might have some insight there, Stefan, that I'm missing.
Well, no, not insight really. I've dealt with a lot of the political CSPs, and the first thing is that yes, the political vetting either by Campaign Verify or by Aegis gives you the ability to open up a political use case. The political use case, by its very nature, is a multi-use case. So you can open up a use case that will enable you to run up to 5 different sub-use cases. So it means that you immediately can run different things within your single campaign. But what a lot of people do is they do separate out fundraising from, say, specific election campaigns, or they will separate out maybe different kinds of messaging, get out the vote, GOTV sort of thing. They'll separate that out sometimes from other things because they want to track the kind of the ROI, just how well is it performed. And so we've seen people do several different things. They will have a single number attached to a campaign that is very unique, even though that political campaign can run multiple sub-use cases. They will use it just for one thing, and then they'll fire up another campaign for the next thing. And usually the biggest distinction is usually a lot of people seem to separate out fundraising very specifically, and also polling and surveys. They will separate the surveys because they do want to track what's happening there, and they will maybe have sometimes unique numbers that they can see responses to and be able to track back, even down to area codes where they're getting better responses from on surveys, or from a city code, so that they know, especially if they're doing a statewide campaign, which parts of the state are responding better. So I think you're right, Emily. It really depends. The devil's always in the detail in this particular one. What is trying to be achieved? Is it speed to get something up? Well, once you've got your political vetting completed, you can get these campaigns up pretty quick. If it's about how many campaigns can I push through in one go? Well, if you've got a lot of campaigns to launch, the only thing that if you're doing it over APIs, if you're a company that is connected to bandwidth via APIs, then it's as fast as all of our respective APIs are able to absorb the information, confirm the information, and kind of spit it out the other side. But if you're doing it over UI, then how quickly can you type?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you both. And again, thank you, Emily, Stefan, for joining us today and sharing this information, answering these questions. We appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for joining us and giving us some of your time today. If you would like to chat more one-on-one or have additional questions and would like to schedule a meeting, please reach out to your account owner or email us at webinars@bandwidth.com. We would love to help you or connect you to any resources. Thank you for joining us. We hope it was informative and that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.